taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. Sangye chodang soki chonam la, Janju bardu dagni kapsuchi, dagi chonyengi pe, sonam gi drola pencher sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki chonam la, Janju bardu dagni kapsuchi, dagi chonyengi pe sonam gi, drola pencher sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki chonam la, Janju bardu dakni kapsuchi, dagi chonyen gi pe, sonam gi, rola pencher sangye drupar shok. This commentary of the way of the Bodhisattva. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teachings, like a star, an optical illusion or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud. So should one consider all compounded things. While reciting these words, we should reflect on impermanence and the lack of reality in phenomena, and conclude with a prayer of dedication. By this merit, may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. Heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massa Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Alakitsvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates, also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Alakitsvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Alakitsvara said this to the venerable Shariputra. Any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates, also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and no death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. all the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awakened in the unsurpassable perfection, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the equal, the mantra that is thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like this. It is like that. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, Gandharvas, and were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Praise to Manjushri. Homage to my guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son. All creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You, whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. You, whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapsa Nadi. With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind. Enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. Shaji Poki Jug Xing Mi Tra Tog Tram Ri Rang Ling Ji Ni Degen Pati Sangye Jing Du Mi De Uai Droku Nam Dag Jing La Ho Jo Par Shog. Inner Mandala. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects. Let me start over. Inner Mandala. Please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings to be released from the 3 poisonous minds, for I am offering without attachments my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. Mandala offering for requesting teachers. O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release the rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami.
Thank you so much.
I apologize.
Oh, no, it went wonderfully. Thank you. So we'll just spend a few moments recollecting our purpose and our opportunity today, seizing this moment of the precious human rebirth not underestimating its rarity, how difficult it is to obtain, how deeply meaningful it is, and how, because we're studying together, helping one another to generate within ourselves the extraordinary mind of bodhicitta, step by step, as explained and described so eloquently, so powerfully in Shantideva's extraordinary text, Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. To make a very strong internal motivation that will hold our own intention to travel on this very path as the essence of all our activities, day and night. So we're going to continue exploring Shantideva's text, and last week we were still dealing with the individual antidotes for protecting the mind from degeneration, and the verse we were investigating in some depth was verse 55, being very resolute and faithful, steady, respectful, polite, with a sense of shame, apprehensive and peaceful, I should strive to make others happy. And also verse 56, I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another. I should know them to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore be kind towards them. Again, we are asked to adopt these qualities, such as resoluteness and faith, respect, steadfastness, sense of shame, apprehension, meaning here being apprehensive of what might happen if we continuously produce non-virtuous actions due to an understanding of their consequence. So it's reasonable to be apprehensive. And peacefulness, in order to ensure that we'll indeed have the means and wherewithal to abandon doubt and wrong consciousness, together with preserving the capacity to preserve and maintain a strong faith through belief in three jewels and the points of advice that spring flawlessly from them. As Geshe Doga indicates, quote, as a means to protect others from the negative mind of losing faith or criticizing a bodhisattva needs to ensure that they're engaging in the means and conduct of making others happy. So this is why our precious teachers are always advising us to positively infuse, to drench our activities, all our activities, with our bodhicitta motivation. And it's clear that this requires that we also develop the qualities enabling us to do exactly this. The point is, of course, we must skillfully know how to preserve and unfold our own bodhicitta mind, starting from the point where we currently find ourselves, where we currently stand. This involves, therefore, infusing, deeply integrating our bodhisattva practice into the very fabric of our everyday life. As Kabje Zopa Rinpoche advises, quote, if we can make both the motivation before the action and the motivation during the action bodhicitta, by generating a bodhicitta motivation in the morning and maintaining it throughout the day, all our actions will become a cause of enlightenment and bring the greatest benefit and happiness to ourselves and others. This means, Rinpoche continues, not only our virtuous actions of studying Dharma, meditating, reciting mantras and so forth, but even what are normally regarded as the ordinary actions of eating, walking, sitting, sleeping, and working. This is extremely important and constitutes one definition of what is meant by knowing how to practice Dharma. So again, the all-important question remains, why would we want to do this? Why would we want to practice Dharma? This is a question that we must definitely answer, as it underlies all our Dharmic pursuits. The answer, in other words, settles all doubts and establishes an astonishingly coherent and vital direction, one far removed from the pursuit of trivial worldly gains for our own sake or advantage. We are to engage in this way, as Rinpoche has been describing, for the purpose of making others happy, as Shantideva also concisely puts it in these verses. This is to be the quintessence of the entirety of our motivation, night and day. In recognition, however, that we might be swayed from such a resolve, this wonderful and rare resolve, not just by internal pressures, those concerning our own manner of mind generation, but by external pressures. And this is anticipated by Shantideva's next verse, 56, which was just quoted. So I'll quote it again. I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish who are in discord with one another. I should know them to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore be kind towards them. The instruction, we are not to be disheartened at the behaviour, or should that be the antics or the whims of those who are found endlessly embroiled in disputes and battles and all kinds of tumultuous and exploitative and manipulative behaviours. We're not to become disheartened by witnessing such behaviour. Indeed, in fact, to the contrary, in witnessing this, we're to feel even greater kindness and compassion towards those beings embroiled in such affairs. Even more so, because we become more deeply aware of the power of the disturbing conceptions, what they're capable of making us or anyone do. And the source of our compassion, therefore, is being driven by our understanding of how their actions are being driven by their own disturbing conceptions. They have gained or can gain the upper hand and hence rule supreme. Shantideva has been talking about how this happens over and over again in this text. In fact, they reign supreme so exquisitely that their very visibility gets absorbed back into our ordinary worldly perceptions of things, how they are. It is almost as though the more disturbed are our world leaders, for example, the more we admire their power and dominion over others. Last week, I quoted a very famous verse from Shantideva, found in chapter 1, it's verse 28. Although wishing to be rid of misery, they run towards misery itself. So, like an enemy, those childish ones ignorantly destroy their own chance to be rid of misery in their very bid to maintain their current or even somehow an intensified worldly happiness, which will be all too fleeting indeed. And they also run towards suffering in that bid to be happy in that way, just like bison falling over a cliff. They fall because in the process of following their delusions, they are creating voluminous, non-virtuous conditions for great suffering in the future. This says it all. Understanding this situation, which is a universal one, comprehensively and objectively in this way, how could we not feel even more love and compassion towards them? Certainly from a Bodhisattva perspective, we are not to, even in the slightest, even for a moment, for a split second, consider the prospect that because they are so difficult, so wayward, so recalcitrant, so frustrating, so infuriating even, we should somehow abandon them, walk away, and leave them to their miserable fates, as it were. To put it bluntly, such an abandonment would constitute a cardinal breach of our Bodhisattva promise. It would contradict and betray its very intent. Remember, we frequently recite in our prayers, referring to the Guru Puja, Lama Chopa, the words from verse 104, I quote, "Even if we must remain for an ocean of eons in the fiery hells of Avicii, even for the sake of one sentient being. We seek your blessings to complete the perfection of joyous effort, to strive with compassion for supreme enlightenment and not to be discouraged." Note, even if we must remain for an ocean of eons in the fiery hells of Avicii, even for the sake of one sentient being, not 100 or several, just one. If one, a mere one, is left out, our Bodhisattva vow is compromised, so much so that it's actually broken. Our set of vows is lost. What this means in essence then is that there can be no presentation from the side of the person, meaning that person or those people out there, that could or would legitimize us omitting them, subtracting them, erasing them from our intent to enlighten all sentient beings. You can see the problem. Therefore, we must include mass murderers, those driven by perverse impulses, such as waging wars on massive scales, etc. There is no need to extend this list, as we can come up with examples of our own, particularly in relation to situations and events closer to home, perhaps in our own families or extended social networks. Where is that person manifesting that we feel somehow compelled to leave out? It needn't be a world leader on the world stage. It might be someone, even one of our own children, who's creating massive problems in our lives. So these are really, really important things to bear in mind. The goal here is to be able to look at all of them equally, spontaneously, in a tender, compassionate way, a way that's not in the slightest sanctimonious, meaning that we're not to feel good that we somehow can be compassionate towards people we don't feel good about, because we're trying to talk about a more foundational logic here for feeling compassionate towards someone at all. So, nor are we to feel, and this is a critical point, that we are required to condone their actions if indeed they are non-virtuous and destructive. This is not what we're being asked to do at all. Rather, we're to understand that because they are being driven by compulsive delusions, it is definite that they can be remedied and entirely uprooted. And therefore, in awareness of this, we generate even stronger compassion and care for them. How so? Because we fully comprehend the nature of their plight together with its causes. Remember, it is their own incapacity at present to do that, to comprehend the nature of their plight and its causes, that renders them suitable to be labelled childish, as Shantideva is doing in this verse. He's not using the word childish in a kind of pejorative sense to somehow pull them down into a lesser order of being. He's actually trying to use the image of childishness to talk about a kind of incapability to comprehend things in a responsible fashion, because they don't have the wherewithal, the apparatus, the scope of thinking to actually do that at that moment in time. So, an exemplary example of this capacity to embrace even those whom we might, in worldly terms, tend to call our enemy or our foe, is to be found in the example of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989, he said during his acceptance oration in Oslo, and I quote, "As a Buddhist monk, my concern extends to all members of the human family, and indeed to all sentient beings who suffer. I believe all suffering is caused by ignorance. People inflict pain on others in the selfish pursuit of their own happiness or satisfaction. Yet true happiness comes from a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood." This could, I'm just interposing here. This could be a concise commentary of the entire purpose of Bodhisattva's Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. It's exactly what we've been talking about, based on Shantideva's verses. His Holiness continued, "We need to cultivate a universal responsibility for one another and the planet we share. Although I have found my own Buddhist religion helpful in generating love and compassion, even for those we consider our enemies, I am convinced that everyone can develop a good heart and a sense of universal responsibility with or without religion. With the ever-growing impact of science on our lives, religion and spirituality have a greater role to play in reminding us of our humanity. There is no contradiction between the two." And His Holiness continues, "Each gives us valuable insights into the other. Both science and the teachings of the Buddha tell us of the fundamental unity of all things. This understanding is crucial if we're to take positive and decisive action on the pressing global concern with the environment." Of course, these words have become even more prescient and significant, haven't they, in the interceding decades. His Holiness continued, "I believe all religions pursue the same goals. that of cultivating human goodness and bringing happiness to all human beings. Though the means might appear different, the ends are the same. This compassionate concern for others who suffer, I'm just adding here, His Holiness extended this compassionate concern for those who suffer to include the Chinese government and the people of mainland China. At the end of his speech, he said, "I pray for all of us, oppressor and friend, that together we succeed in building a better world through human understanding and love, and that in doing so, we may reduce the pain and suffering of all sentient beings. Thank you." So His Holiness's continuous global work as a non-violent peacemaker is perhaps without peer in our current age. Likewise, his articulate commitment to non-sectarianism, including religious ecumenicism, is also extraordinary. Such should not be remarkable or extraordinary, but given its rarity, it is. His Holiness is a beacon of light in a troubled world, but who is listening? Rather than think in terms of divisions and warring factions, His Holiness presents an alternative mode of responsible ethical engagement, one focused not on some individuals and some groups over others, but upon, quote, all members of the human family. The very warmth and protective intimacy of the domestic image here perfectly captures the nurturing or even restorative intent behind His Holiness's words. That is call made then, in 1989, for the dedication of the conversion of the entire Tibetan plateau into a zone of ahimsa, a sanctuary of peace and non-violence where human beings and nature can live in harmony and peace and non-violence, has not been realized. And this is a statement to the willfulness of those Shantideva calls childish, who proceed not according to the great universal guiding principles of peace, but to whims. They are whims, not substantial or coherent thoughts or even healthy ideologies, because they are driven and informed at every turn by the relentless ongoing machinery of the afflictions, the disturbing conceptions that when they arise, give rise not just to disharmony within the mind, but ripple outwards externally. Class and racial hatred are obvious examples of this. Whole communities and populations in travail, in desperation, is another. So in Sydney recently, we had a 40-year-old man running through a mega shopping complex called Westfield, stabbing people, mainly women, apparently randomly as he went. The police said that they were random stabbings. One wonders, however, whether stabbing women at random is a random act. In any case, 6 people were killed, including the mother of a 9-year-old baby. As his poor mother realized she had been mortally stabbed and was dying, she threw her baby, which had been cradling in her arms, towards a stranger, a man who was standing nearby, who caught the baby. So she sought to save the baby's life, even as she knew she was losing her own. His rampage only stopped when he was fatally shot by police. The baby had also been stabbed while still with his mother, but fortunately survived. But before he was mortally shot, he was confronted by a very brave security guard, Mr. Tahir, who, while attempting to stop him, and I just mentioned here that in Australia, our shop security guards are not allowed to be armed, was himself fatally stabbed. Mr. Tahir was tragically on the very first day of his new job, and he's already been recognised as a hero, a national hero. So I mention this not to sensationalise, but to point towards the mayhem that can arise when afflicted thoughts drive individuals and perhaps groups towards harmful actions, with little or no awareness of the actual consequences or consideration of them even, or even only a perverse consideration of them. Such would be the nature of an evil intent. It is in recognition of this that Shantideva requires us not to follow in such muddled, murky footsteps. So joining an urban youth gang committed to violence and street bashing would be a case in point. Of course, this is every reasonable parent's dread. So in chapter 1, verse 9, Shantideva says, if I behave in the same way as the childish, I shall certainly proceed to the lower realms. And if I am led there by those unequal to the noble ones, what is the use of entrusting myself to the childish? So thus, to profoundly care for the childish does not involve we follow them, meaning we are to behave just as they are behaving. To do so would be a folly without peer. So there are some supporting quotes here and to also support our interpretation of this verse. And these are Gyaltsabje's quotes given in his own commentary. From the Ornament of Mahayana Sutras, by thinking how they are without power, due to constant faults, possessing the mind, do not hold it against beings. And from the 400 Stanzas by Aryadeva, just as a physician is not upset with someone who rages while possessed by a demon, subduers see disturbing emotions as the enemy, not the person who has them. So this is what resides behind the meaning of great compassion, as contrasted to ordinary compassion, which is prone to be wobbly and partisan, fugitive perhaps, and in itself whimsical, playing on the word whim here from Shantideva's earlier verse. It is correspondingly weaker and unreliable. Sometimes we have it and sometimes we don't. It is awkwardly fragile because the premises of ordinary compassion are themselves shallow. They are themselves subject to deluded biases. We have to be sort of be gentle with ourselves in acknowledging this. It's a really sensitive issue and one that we have to navigate carefully. We especially care for my child, my family, my country, my people, etc. But thinking in this limited way, this kind of restricted way, we're curtailing our frame of reference, aren't we, is a recipe for a delirious whirlpool, as our allegiances will invariably clash with the allegiances of others. And this, of course, is precisely what we see in our current world. It's just a seething mass of conflicting allegiances, all claiming to be on the side of virtue and rightness. This is, you know, an incredibly difficult situation, frightening situation. By way of, but I also mentioned something here why we have to be so careful in navigating this point is that the great teachers also point out that we have to start from where we are. So we have to grow our ordinary compassion into something more robust, something more expansive. It's not that we have to somehow criticize that our ordinary compassion is restricted, but we do recognize it's constricted, yet it does exhibit in the most wonderful way the capacity and meaning of caring for others. We have to have at least that thought to begin to try to develop the mind of bodhicitta, to even see it as a possibility. So we're not putting ordinary compassion down here, but we are contrasting it to great compassion, which is great. Why? Because it's founded upon having generated a true renunciation within ourselves. And a true renunciation here means that we've realized the meaning of true cessation in the context of the set of the Four Noble Truths. But also because on a renounced basis, we're no longer clinging to our own happiness as our immediate goal, and nor do we believe that we're going to find our own happiness within the constructions of cyclic existence, because we've recognized through meditating on the Four Noble Truths the faults of cyclic existence and in a way the vanity of cyclic existence. We therefore have a basis to cogently wish for the liberation from suffering of all others, not just in a limited or local sense, but in the greater sense of an escape or a freedom from cyclic existence, and even freedom from the obstructions to omniscience, to enlightenment. So if we haven't ourselves first generated the wish for definite emergence, we would have no means to comprehend what escaping from rushing willfully towards suffering, even in the name of some temporal happiness, might mean, referring back to Shantideva's verse. Great compassion is therefore an indispensable component, a critical causal condition for generating fully fledged bodhicitta. Indeed, it's what leads us to accept the exceptional resolve to take upon ourselves total responsibility, meaning universal responsibility, for obtaining full omniscience, full enlightenment, so that we can work flawlessly and continuously on the behalf of others. This assumption of universal responsibility, which His Holiness also mentioned, if you remember, in his Noble Peace speech, is the summation, signaling that we have indeed generated bodhicitta. If we possess it, we have every condition necessary for engaging in the perfections and thus actually producing the causes for enlightenment, our stated singular aim, as outlined at the beginning of today's presentation. So this is how we're to exactly serve to tailor our response most perfectly, most precisely, to benefit every sentient being, each of whom comes with their own unique history of karmic predispositions and therefore needs. But to achieve this goal, we also need to generate a wisdom realizing the actual mode of existence of things. His Holiness the Dalai Lama explains, the real basis of Dharmakaya, the Buddha's truth body, is his wisdom mind. This is described in the text as the omniscient state of mind, which has the dual character of a profound insight into the ultimate nature of reality of all things, while at the same time perceiving the diversity of conventional reality in its entirety. Since that is the nature of Dharmakaya, the path leading to its attainment must share features corresponding to its ultimate objective, to this ultimate objective. This path is a sustained cultivation of insight into emptiness, which enables us to transcend all the limitations of conceptual elaboration. End of quote. So His Holiness goes on to explain how the second embodiment of a Buddha's enlightenment is the Rupakaya, or his form body, through which the Buddha assumes diverse forms in order to benefit all sentient beings. His Holiness describes the path that shares features corresponding to this aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment is primarily the cultivation of bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of the infinite number of sentient beings. This strong compassion must be grounded upon a strong compassion that aspires to free all beings from suffering. With this altruistic intention as a motivation, we engage in the practice of the 6 perfections. So we're dealing here with the need to integrate compassion and wisdom. In terms of our immediate discussion of Shantideva's 56th verse, what we are to take from this is the essential need to combine the 2 factors of wisdom and method. Method here referring to love, compassion, and bodhicitta, and to practice these as a united pair. This is because, as His Holiness has just explained, we can't achieve our enlightenment goal to benefit others otherwise. We need to have both the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya established. Again, in the words of His Holiness, it is crucial that these 2 aspects of the path are well combined, for they complement and reinforce each other. And His Holiness illustrates, for example, depending on our understanding of emptiness, it has a tremendous power. Depending on our understanding of emptiness, has a tremendous power to enhance our natural empathetic feeling towards other sentient beings, and thus give rise to stronger compassion. Similarly, enhancing our compassion can expedite our accumulation of merit, which makes it easier for us to deepen our understanding of emptiness. So we can see how these 2 aspects of the path complement each other. They don't just complement each other, as honestly describing, they nurture and support each other. They develop each other, and then the union develops each other even further. That it creates this incredible momentum. So entailed in this is the need to comprehend the necessity of an organic yet logical sequential approach to our own practice. We are to proceed in stages, each leading organically to the next, without seeking to ignore or leave out or to somehow skip a single developmental step. So, in practical terms, we must strive initially to at least suppress our temporary negative impulses, lest, as Shantideva has and is so thoroughly describing, they overwhelm us and lead us to misery, even great misery. If this is the case, not only will we be unable to help oneself, but will be unable to effectively help anyone else. So through familiarization with this practice, this of quelling, at least temporarily, the power of the afflictions, we gain a capacity to go further, to examine the nature of the circumstances involved. Because we must proceed from not just temporarily suppressing the afflictions, but to successfully uproot them from their very base. And this capacity invariably relies upon achieving higher realizations. We can't currently do this. His Holiness says, in fact, when we speak of gaining higher levels of realization in Buddhism, we are primarily speaking of the processes through which our wisdom and insight deepen. It is actually the wisdom aspect that enables a practitioner to move from one level to the next on the path. End of quote. So again, the process of penetrating the nature of reality more deeply as we proceed, indeed, we proceed on that very basis, must be accompanied seamlessly by the method aspect of the path. His Holiness explains how this must involve a dynamic immersion in the world. I think this is really, really important to consider. We don't just meditate, but we also jump in and directly engage with the world. This means particularly, in terms of our Bodhisattva perspective, to engage with the beings and citizens within. We're using the word world here to encapsulate anywhere where there might be beings. All sentient beings, in fact. Those whom we now regard through the power of our bodhicitta as our dearest friends. So thus we can identify the two realms of integrated activity as follows. In the words of His Holiness, if our engagement with the world is at the level of the diversity of things and objects, which means we're out and about doing stuff, with individual things, picking up things, putting things down, meeting things, and so forth, actually engaging. This is the method aspect of the path. When we engage with the world in terms of the deeper nature of reality, which is understood as the emptiness of all things and events, this practice belongs to the cultivation of wisdom. End of quote. So we can appreciate this necessary sequence to our developmental practice by considering the organization of verses in the Lam Rim prayer found in the Lama Chopa. For reasons, examples of as I've been stressing, it is clear that we need to accomplish the perfection of wisdom within our own continuums, but it's also a fact that we can only accomplish this feat upon having first developed the perfection of concentration. So verse 105 of the Lam Rim prayer says, by avoiding the faults of dullness, agitation, and mental wandering, with one-pointed concentration, set on the mode of existence of all phenomena, voidness of true existence, inspire me to complete the perfection of concentration. So on this basis, we then engage in a direct, non-conceptual, non-dual meditative absorption in space-like emptiness. This is depicted in the following verse, 106. Through the wisdom discriminating suchness, conjoined with the induced tranquility and great bliss, inspire me to complete the perfection of wisdom through the space-like yoga, absorbed on the ultimate truth. Then, on this basis, and when we arise from our cushion in the post-meditative equipoise period, we engage in worldly affairs, but from the very exceptional and very profound stance now of recognizing that although things still appear to exist inherently from their own side, due to the force of the karmic imprints of innate self-grasping ignorance, nevertheless, we recognize that they don't exist in this way at all. So this captures the next verse of the Lam Rim prayer, 107. Inspire me to perfect illusion-like concentration by realizing how all outer and inner phenomena lack true existence, yet still appear like illusions, dreams, or the moon's image in a still lake. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, in his commentary on these verses, gives a wonderful pithy account, which I'll quote in full. In regards to 105, the passage explains the practice of meditative stabilization. May I be able to overcome mental sinking and mental excitement, which are the internal obstacles to concentration. So here, His Holiness says, the object taken for meditative stabilization is emptiness. An analytical process is being applied, and absorptive meditation has been undertaken. This is what is meant by searching for the absorptive meditation through the analytical process. And in regards to verse 106, here the perfection of wisdom is explained. The wisdom distinguishing the nature of phenomena when assisted by the factors of mental and physical pliancy arising after a realization of emptiness, could then engage in a yoga of space-like meditative equipoise. And in regards to 107, regarding one's practice in the period subsequent to the attainment of equipoise, the verse says that although all phenomena, both external and internal, lack inherent existence, they still appear. They are just like reflections. Although they do appear to be objectively existent, there is no such existence. Their existence is only on the nominal level. So you should have the conviction, although at this stage things do appear to me as inherently existent, since I have had the experience of their emptiness during meditative equipoise, I know that they are like illusions. This explains the illusion-like meditation of the post-meditational period. In his commentary on Tsongkhapa's Three Principles of the Path, His Holiness expands the meaning of how phenomena lack inherent existence, yet may still appear. They are just like reflections, he says. Although phenomena do not have inherent existence, they have nominal existence. When we see the reflection of our face in the mirror, the reflection is not the face itself. In other words, the reflection is empty of a real face. Even though the reflection of the face is not a face, the reflection of a face arises. The reflection is completely empty of being the real face, and yet it is very much there. It was produced by causes and conditions, and it will disintegrate due to causes and conditions. Similarly, phenomena have a nominal existence, although they have no existence independent of causes and conditions. And His Holiness now extracts the key point. If you examine yourself or any other phenomena carefully in this way, you'll find that although all phenomena appear to exist inherently, no phenomena exist from their own side as they appear to us. However, they do have nominal existence that produces results, is functional, and whose activities are infallible. End of quote. So if you think I've been leading us away from the central thread of Shantideva's own logical sequencing of the verses, you are mistaken. Because what I've sought to do here today, and in a concise fashion, while acknowledging that these are very complex issues indeed, is to alight with some weight upon Shantideva's next verse, 57, which reads, "In doing that which by nature is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I should always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self." Clearly, this verse is also dealing with what His Holiness has just described as the illusion-like meditation of the post-meditational period. In particular, it concerns the manner in which I can be established to exist in an illusion-like way, yet still engage in activities and function. In a nutshell, Shantideva is asking us, on the basis of this realization, to avoid engaging in activities for the sake of both myself and other sentient beings on the secure and profound and infallible basis of our own realization of emptiness, and in particular, the emptiness of our I, our own self. Thus, we are unavoidably confronted with the immediate challenge of comprehending just what is meant by this last line, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. So this is what we've been leading up to today, and I admit it, we are to be tossed, hurled even, into the profound depths of Buddhist religious thought, religious soteriology and philosophy. So soteriology here has got to do with your theories of liberation. The Buddhist account of liberation is entirely grounded on this understanding of the nature of reality in this profound way. The implication of Shantideva's presentation is that if we have not generated this capacity to act like an apparition with no sense of self, we will not be able to effectively avoid unwholesome actions, though we might manage, as I was talking about before, to temporarily suppress them. Nor will I be able to hold my mind sufficiently firm to work for the benefit of others or even myself. So this again spells out the incredible importance of this current topic. In other words, if we are still clinging to our own personal existence in a distorted and disturbed, indeed disturbing way, and along with this are also comprehending the world around us in a distorted, hallucinated way, we will be unable to act appropriately and reliably in any direction or towards anything. Why not? Because we are still being driven, even guided by ignorance, and more specifically, by the ignorance that is the first link of the 12 links of interdependent origination. So I can only mention this, touch upon that in passing today due to time restraints. So straight to the crunch. If we don't know how to liberate ourselves from the wheel of samsara by uprooting and reversing the force of this primordial ignorance, together, and so in order to overcome the afflictions, then how can we even hope to imagine how we might be able to start working towards liberating other sentient beings from the wheel of psycho-existence? You can see here that we're being sort of woven back into the need to develop renunciation, absolutely develop renunciation, but we're looking at it from the perspective now of the need to generate wisdom in order to generate true renunciation. To elaborate a little more, Chandrakirti explains how we are to eradicate all afflictions by comprehending our own personal selflessness, described in this context as the root of samsara, and thus dispelling our clinging to an erroneous view involving a reification of our identity. I'll come back to this idea of reification in a minute. But the quote from Chandrakirti: yogis who wish to enter reality and who wish to eliminate all afflictions and faults examine the question, what does this samsara have as a root? He continues, when they thoroughly investigate this, they see that samsara has as its root the reifying view of a personal identity. And they see that the self is the object observed by this reifying identity. They see that not observing the self leads to eliminating the reifying view of a personal identity, and that through eliminating that, all afflictions and faults are overcome. Hence, at the very beginning, they examine only the self, asking, what is the self that is the object of self-grasping, or a grasping self? End of quote. So you'll note immediately the reference here that this is what we're to do at the very beginning as trainee bodhisattvas here. This means now. So just to get back to this reification, in Western philosophical terms, it technically means when you think of something abstract as a physical thing. So we make something that's mental into a physical thing. But for our wisdom purposes, our Madhyamika purposes, we'll have to extend this to mean all things, not just physical. For example, our own person. So we reify ourselves into something more solid, more actual, more real, if you like, than it actually is. We're not saying it doesn't exist, but it doesn't exist in the concretized, solidified, independently assertive way, self-assertive way that we instinctively grasp it to be. So this is the key question we must also pose ourselves. How does this I exist? Because there's no escaping it, correctly answering it, that is, if we are to progress on the path. So this is precisely Chandrakirti's emphasis. Therefore, once again, our great challenge is to comprehend what Shantideva means when he asks us to act like an apparition with no sense of self. This is because he's pointing to exactly the same thing as Chandrakirti, and for exactly the same reasons. And as Tsongkhapa categorically and emphatically states, quote, without rejecting the object of the grasping of a self of persons, a realization of selflessness cannot occur. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, the elimination of wrong views and afflictions cannot be accomplished simply by making aspirational prayers. We must cultivate the wisdom that directly opposes their false and erroneous perspectives. Just abiding in a state of non-conceptuality and non-mentation does not eliminate these obscurations. Although defilements might not arise in a non-conceptual state, there is nothing in the non-conceptual content of that experience that contradicts or reduces their power. End of quote. So only a realization of selflessness has this power. Perhaps here a further qualm might be popping up or even leaping up. In merely thinking of ourselves as somehow selfless, we might be genuinely worried that does this mean that we have no self at all? That we are somehow a non-existent entity, like the son of a barren woman, and the like, as Chandrakirti puts it. The son of a barren woman is a classic Buddhist image of a non-existent entity of thing. Now, this is an important and legitimate question, one that immediately leads us towards the need to develop a thorough and nuanced understanding of what is meant by selflessness. Only by interrogating the assumed or presumed reality of ourselves, together with that of other phenomena, will we manage to generate the capacity to understand how we're to arrive at the correct view whereby we comprehend in authentic experiential understanding terms how dependent arising is the meaning of emptiness, and emptiness is the meaning of dependent arising. Put in other words, a sign that our wisdom has indeed been perfected will be indicated by our ability, our unique capacity to reconcile dream-like appearances and emptiness. They stand not in contradiction to one another, but exactly complement one another. They are two sides of the same coin. This has already been touched upon in His Holiness's commentary on Tsongkhapa's Three Principles of the Path, but there are many similar passages. For example, verse 108 in the Lama Chopa says, samsara and nirvana lack even an atom of true existence, while dependent arising by cause and effect is non-deceptive. Inspire me to realize the import of Nagarjuna's thought that these two are not contradictory, but complementary. His Holiness elaborates on this verse from Lama Chopa. These lines explain the seeing of emptiness in terms of dependent arising, and dependent arising in terms of emptiness. It is through the reasoning of dependent arising that one establishes emptiness. Because it is not independent, emptiness itself is not inherently existent. The texts explain that conventional reality, appearance, and the final mode of existence, emptiness, are complementary to each other. So, when you develop ascertainment of the infallibility of the law of interdependence, you will know that things are dependent upon other factors and that they lack an independent nature. Therefore, you'll be able to perceive that the appearance and the actual status are not contradictory, but rather complementary. End of quote. So again, if we relate this straight back to the language of Shantideva's verse, we can now begin to appreciate that the first person of that verse, namely ourselves, is able to see ourselves as existing and in an illusory or dreamlike fashion only because we have earlier ascertained via our own valid cognizer our own phenomenological emptiness. Therefore, it's obvious that Shantideva is asking us, requiring us to make this same ascertainment ourselves as we are seekers on the same Bodhisattva's path. And if we don't venture to do this, we will have no capacity to realize ourselves in an illusion-like manner. So Jay's put her hand. Is it Jay? Yeah. Oh no, sorry, Shayla. Go ahead. Yeah.
Can you say that one more time? What Shantideva is asking us? I didn't quite. It didn't click.
He's asking us to be able to see ourselves in a dreamlike, illusion-like fashion, independence on having realized our own lack of inherent existence. Because only then do we have a stable foundation for our practice as a bodhisattva going forward. Because we'll no longer be distorting and misconstruing the way that things are. Which is also including our objects of compassion and so forth. I mean, we just look at this sort of on a sort of sideways way for a moment. Through innate self-grasping ignorance, I don't just conceive myself, I, to be existing from my own side, but I also perceive the other to my eye as existing from its own side. And because of that, when I project all types of qualities onto that, say, person, I don't see that those qualities that I see that person having as a product of my own projection. Rather, an entirely antagonistic and opposite way, I see them as embedded in the very nature of that object themselves, independently of me and any other factors for that matter. And therefore, my hated object, which I've created, is hateable by virtue of its own innate character. And therefore, with impunity, I can stab it to death. You can see here there's a massive problem here because I'm not acknowledging the sort of radio width, the kind of scope that my own mental distortions are playing in creating the very object that I'm killing, if you like. And so I've used an extreme example of killing, but if we take a milder example, if our own child is sick, their need seems to us much greater naturally than any other need of any other child in the universe. That is also a projection of our own mind. Due to innate self-grasping ignorance, we see our own child with a fondness that has nothing to do with our mental projection from our side. It seems to be simply because of the wonderful fact that our child is the most precious thing that has ever existed. It is the most precious thing. Naturally, I'm going to look after it with all my might. There's a child that's identical to my child, except it's got a different mind stream next door. That child isn't regarded in the same way as mine because my child is predicated on an overestimation of me. Because I'm hallucinating what is I, I'm hallucinating what is mine in relation to that I. And through this, the whole universe is distorted in a way that makes it impossible, as Shantideva is pointing out in his verse, to act with firmness and steadiness to uproot wrongdoing. It's also preventing us from extensively practicing virtue because we're being blocked in our capacity by clinging to a self-cherishing idea, which itself is predicated on an overestimation of this I. So these aren't academic points. I know it sounds like a dreadfully academic subject, but it's actually the most poignant subject if we really begin to look at it, because it leads us into a causal behavioral explanation of the very capacity we have to generate afflictions. And because we have that capacity of understanding, we also have the capacity, Shantideva has been pointing out in the immediate previous verse, of also embracing those who we might otherwise regard as dismissible because they are driven by childish whims that we object to or we see as somehow silly or trivial, because we recognize that they are also struggling in the same way.
Thank you very much. That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. The language, it's a real language thing here. We always have to learn a new vocabulary because there's no other way of describing the subtlety of these points. And I find it's a matter of, similar to what I've done today, finding multiple references, passages to these things and coming into them from slightly different angles every time, because each passage demands that. And over time, we start to get a sense of what's involved in this topic. But what I'm trying to do today, and I realize I'm sort of maybe pushing a little bit, I don't mean to be sort of doing that, is to give us permission to start to think about it and why we must start to think about it. It is really imperative from our Bodhisattva perspective that we do immerse ourselves in this opportunity of exploring these topics. And I'm only not even touching on it today. I'm only sort of pointing in the direction. So Shantideva is also asking us to appreciate that, yes, we do exist, but we only exist nominally, as His Holiness puts it, which means as mere conceptual imputations. We exist as a mere I, neither more nor less. Yet, it is on this very nominal basis, only on this very nominal basis, that we are able to only nominally function in an also nominally existent world. This is the nominal world in which cause and conditions are in play. As His Holiness earlier described the compatibility of emptiness and dependent arising, when we establish that we're empty, we're suddenly opened up to a recognition in a way that's never been available before of how indeed we are interdependent. And therefore, the whole idea or notion of ethical practice is suddenly completely transformed into something much richer, much deeper, much more meaningful. If my happiness could be achieved just within my own immediate terms, because I'm totally, take a sort of cruder level, self-sufficient, I don't need to worry about anything around me. I just have to work on what's here. But even on an ordinary level, we know that's not true. I have to eat, for example. Otherwise, I starve. So there's an interdependence there. If I existed inherently with this inherently existent body, I would not need to eat. I'd be totally existent in and of myself without relation to any other thing. This can't be the case. So we can come to it from so many different angles. If I was inherently angry, because my delusion of anger has been cultivated, then I would be angry in each and every situation spontaneously without any reference to what was playing out in front of me, because my anger would be innately present as my nature. That is not the case. I'm only angry in dependence on causes and conditions. Because my anger, including and me, who has the anger, do not exist in and of themselves from their own side. So you can see here how the two keep working together. It's incredibly powerful to start thinking in this way. So remember His Holiness said, phenomena have a nominal existence, although they have no existence independent of causes and conditions. So when we say that something has nominal existence, we're not saying it has no existence whatsoever. But we are saying that it has no existence independence of causes and conditions. So this is also the case with that phenomena which we label I. I label I here. You don't label I here because you're labeling I there. That I is contingent. So anyway, we might have a few moments to look at that a little bit more. So Tsongkhapa says, persons and the like who are born, die, and transmigrate, and who bear analysis are not found, not even a particle, when sought with the reasonings that analyze suchness. Nevertheless, positive and negative effects occur relative to illusion-like phenomena. You need to arrive at an understanding of such statements. End of quote. Tsongkhapa says, these two, emptiness and arising, are undeniably contained in a common locus. They're on the same spot. You should train your mind in the thought that likewise, although persons also do not have even a particle of inherent establishment, this does not contradict that they accumulate karma, experience effects, and are born depending on previous karma, afflictions, and so forth. This you should know in all such circumstances. End of quote. But Tsongkhapa fully and candidly acknowledges the immense difficulty involved in successfully arriving at such an immensely refined and subtle realization. He says, however, the difficult point is to achieve certainty from the depths of one's heart about both negating all inherent existence established by way of an intrinsic nature and positing those inherent non-existent persons and so forth as accumulators of karma, experience of effects, and so forth. Since that combination of the two, it is this combination of the two that enables one to posit both he says, since that combination of the two that enables one to posit both is next to impossible to understand. It is extremely difficult to find the Majjhimika view. End of quote. So we're to take some consolation in that, but it doesn't mean that we're to stop trying. So this explanation, it's not an explanation, but the beginnings of an explanation, conveys why this verse about the illusion-like self of Shantideva's falls under Gyaltsabje's heading, the common antidote. It is the common antidote because it enables us to overcome all the afflictions in their entirety if we've realized emptiness. Gyaltsabje's pithy encapsulation of the meaning of this verse goes as follows. The engagement in virtuous actions which are free from forbidden and natural misdeeds is for the purpose of oneself not degenerating and for the benefit of sentient beings. Engage in actions as if they are illusions or magical apparitions by holding them with the wisdom realizing emptiness. Thus, always protect your mind without pride or exaggeration. End of quote. So the implication is that if we can indeed do this, we'll be protected from pride or exaggeration, indicating inflated conceptual overestimations of ourselves, which support, shore up the very manner in which we mistakenly, erroneously hold and believe ourselves to exist as a person, the very manner in which we exist as a person. Put another way, it refers to our capacity to operate beyond the dictates of inappropriate attention that does its exaggerating work in dependence on self-grasping ignorance. So self-grasping ignorance provides the basis for the building up of all of these conceptual elaborations and delusions. We can keep stacking them up because we believe that the thing is really the way that it's appearing. We don't have any doubt that that's the case innately, instinctively, because we haven't trained in developing the view that exactly contradicts that false perception of reality. So Geshe Sopa, one of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche's precious gurus, puts it as follows, and this really encapsulates, I think, the content of today's presentation. Valid reasoning can also negate the way that attachment and hatred hold their objects. Attachment, hatred, and all other mental afflictions arise from ignorance. So just interposing here, that's why realizing the wisdom that contradicts this ignorance is the common antidote. Ignorance superimposes true existence onto things, and the ordinary mind applies inappropriate attention to them, seeing them as attractive or ugly from their own side. It is important to understand inappropriate attention. So Geshe Sopa elaborates. First, we have a mind of ignorance arising with regard to the object, whereby we hold it to exist inherently. Then we have a mind of inappropriate attention arising towards that object, which appears to exist inherently, whereby we hold it to be beautiful or ugly and so on from its own side. So first we hold the object to exist inherently, and then we hold that object in a further inappropriate way. The texts usually mention 4 kinds of inappropriate attention: holding impermanent things as permanent, holding things that are in the nature of suffering as pleasurable, holding impure things as pure, and holding selfless things as self-existent. The objects of these minds appear inherently existent, but these minds do not hold them to exist inherently. These minds arise from another mind that holds them to exist inherently: ignorance. The appearance of things as inherently attractive or as inherently ugly. So you can elaborate here. I'll continue. The appearance of things as inherently attractive or as inherently ugly arises from the imprints deposited by ignorance grasping at inherent existence and reflects specific tendencies within the mind stream. Then, on the basis of that, additional superimposed qualities, attachment, aversion, so forth, arise. And the final sentence of this quote, because attachment and aversion are indirectly influenced by ignorance, they too can be negated by ultimate logical analysis. Now, I did have a whole section of my talk here dedicated to looking at this point a little bit more because it refers very directly to Stephen's question last week, but I'll actually skip it today. I'll send him a copy because Stephen's not able to be present. So much more can be said on this topic. But I'm just going to give some further quotes that sort of support the topic so far. Dharmakirti, in his commentary on Things Valid, says, "You know people as others because you are supposed to have a self. You grasp at the pair, self and others, and become hostile. These are all related. All misdeeds derive from them." Pabonka quotes from Shantideva's Engaging in the Middle Way. "May my mind perceive that every faulty delusion derives from views that equate the set of the aggregates with the self. At first, I clung to the self, the I, and I developed attachment to things, to them, thinking this is mine." Pabonka's concluding comment to his quotation of that verse, "Although the root of the 6 subtle and extensive root delusions is ignorance, one develops attachment, hostility, doubt, and so forth, in dependence on the view of equating the self with the perishable." That's referring to this personal clinging to the I as inherently existent, based on imputing it on the aggregates. And in dependence on attachment and so forth, one accumulates karma. And in dependence on this karma, one cycles in samsara. The roots of samsara are ignorance, the view that equates the self with the perishable set of aggregates, the instinctive grasping at an I. To abandon delusion for good, says Pabonka, one must work hard at applying the antidote to ignorance and to grasping at a self. That is, the wisdom that understands selflessness. This wisdom that understands selflessness is therefore like a white panacea medicine that can destroy hundreds of evils. From the 400 verses, that is why, quote, "that is why all delusions are conquered when benightedness is conquered." And from the Sutra of the 10 Stages, "In this world, all misdeeds ever committed arose or are found, or to be found, came from manifest clinging to a self. Without manifest clinging to a self, these would not happen." So this is why Shantideva, in his opening verse to chapter 9, which is dedicated to this topic of wisdom, famously says, "All these practices were taught by the Mighty One for the sake of wisdom. Therefore, those who wish to pacify suffering should generate this wisdom." And His Holiness glosses this verse. This entire preparation, all these practices in Berson's translation, refers to the first 5 transcendental practices of generosity and so on, or it may refer to meditative absorption. All of these were taught by the Buddha, Shakyamuni, in order to cultivate ultimate wisdom. So I'm conscious of the time, so I'm just going to jump a little bit. Let's go to touch a little bit on Dharmakirti's verse, which I've just quoted. "You know people as others because you're supposed to have a self. You grasp at the pair, self and others, and become hostile. These are all related. All misdeeds come from them, end of quote. So we can precisely and exactly swing this problematic construction of an inherently existent self and an inherently existent others around to generate a spontaneous, uncontrived regard for all beings, not leaving a single one out, by recognizing the direct dialectical opposite to conceiving an inherently existent self and an inherently existent other, through realizing that both those things are empty of existing from their own side. How so? If we can manage to contemplate the situation according to the ultimate viewpoint, the ultimate perspective, we'll come to the astonishing realization that there is no inherent difference between ourselves and others. For example, we, as I pointed out before, are the other of someone else's perspective. So I am I to me and other to you, as your you to me is I to you. I'm not just playing with words here. I'm dealing with a real situation. So from an ultimate perspective, there is no objective basis whatsoever for limited or biased discrimination. There is no existential ground, not even the slightest, that will secure a prejudicial view that would favour my self-cherishing to the exclusion, cruel and callous as it may prove to be, of cherishing others, the exclusion of cherishing others. We block them out, don't we? So the deluded mind is to be deplored in all its manifestations, particularly these most self-justifying ones. So what I'm hoping to do here is propose the radical way in which realizing the emptiness of the self also enables us to recognize the emptiness of the other. And because they exist merely in nominated relationship to one another, they can't exist in and of themselves by dint of their own internal nature from their own side. Therefore, if I'm going to care for this one, which I have every right and purpose in doing, it's logical from an ultimate perspective that I should care for each of you in the same way that I care for me. Because my I to me, which is terribly important, is your you to you. And off we go. So you can see how it creates a level playing field in a totally free and open, radically free and open way that's almost unimaginably vast. So the next verse of Shantideva, 58, says, by thinking again and again that after a long time I have won the greatest leisure, likewise I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable as the king of mountains. So this falls under Gottsabje's heading, the way of training the mind on the antidote. So next week we'll move on. So I'll throw it open to any questions or reflections, and I hope it was sort of coherent. I left some quite large slabs out as I went, so I hope it still worked as a presentation. Yeah, thank you, Tenzin. A question or no?
No, I was saying it worked.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
it worked.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Taylor, yeah.
So if we remove these obscurations, if we use these delusions from our mind,
Yeah.
and we are no longer as important and as we think we are, and we are no longer more important than the person next to us, and everything that I think is an obstacle in my mind is no longer there because it doesn't exist. What do I think about?
No, I mean, again,
where
it's
do I
really,
put my mind?
I know it's it's a really good point. But remember what His Holiness was talking about, we engage in the myriad of things, the multiplicity of things in the world on the basis of recognizing that they lack inherent existence from their own side. We're not saying that they don't exist at all, but we recognize they exist in a way that is not over-inflated, over-conceptualized as being hallucinatedly projected by innate self-grasping ignorance. And so it's very difficult to describe what that might be like. I'm not speaking from my own experience here because I could otherwise attempt to describe it, because it's the other side of a giant river. Unless we've found a way over that bridge to the view, recognizing the view, we're not going to have an opportunity there. And so in technical terms, it said that when one absorbs one's mind in space-like emptiness, in deep meditative equipoise, the self, I, meditating, and the object, emptiness, that's directly realized in that moment, merge together like water into water. So this is indescribable experientially, because language is dependent on subject-object relations, and such is not operating in this extraordinarily profound meditative absorption. But when the meditator arises out of that state, things again appear. The eye sense consciousness sees things, the hearing consciousness hears things, the body sense touches things, the mind starts to think conceptually again, and so forth. And due to the force of innate self-grasping ignorance, which is imprinted on our mind stream, those things will appear again to exist from their own side. However, there's an absolutely extraordinarily radical difference now, because that meditator, because they've realized that they don't in fact exist in that way that they're currently appearing, sees them existing as mere conceptual nominations. But having said that, they are able to function. And so people function, trees function, mountains function, time functions, life functions, death functions. All of the interplay, the cosmological net of independent relations can only be there operatively if things exist without inherent existence. And so the world is not being annihilated at all. And so, as His Holiness said in that earlier quote, the very foundation of our ethical practice is now unlocked, because we realize that our happiness and others' happiness is absolutely interdependent. And therefore, the only ethical response is to care for the other, because we've also done these other deep investigations. If I was really more important than you, sorry to hear that you may not like this at all, but I'm actually superior to you. Not just superior to you, but I'm innately superior to you. I've always been superior. It doesn't matter what happens, I'm going to be superior because I'm superior. If that was the case, how on earth could I have compassion for you? I couldn't get past this. I would have no need to. It would be absolutely hunky-dory. I'm the best. I'm sorry. That isn't at all. That's just a fabrication of my mind. And it's anchored in a false estimation of what's here. I can only build that edifice of distorted thinking on the premise that I innately exist as an I. I've just established that what's here doesn't innately exist as an I, just from the very general point of view, that I don't appear as I to you, do I? I appear as other, as I've just been pointing out. So my only opportunity or hope to have a reasonable transactional relationship with the other is to recognize how we exist interdependently. And that means that my notion of ethical responsibility is incredibly enhanced. If my enemy was really the enemy, then I could starve them to death with impunity. The world would be better off not having them if they're really an enemy. That is not the case. So the way in which things exist merely through imputation is said to only be available when we have realized that things exist as empty. And in order to reach that point, we have to dismantle or deconstruct the way in which they're currently appearing. And that involves delving into whether they exist in the way that they appear to exist. And so we're then led on this deep and incredible journey into the exploration of this wisdom topic. But what I've hoped to do today is present that within, as does Shantideva, within the framework of our Bodhisattva practice and our need to integrate method and wisdom together.
Definitely thumbs up. The only thing that keeps going through my mind over and over and over again as you speak is, I really need to get out of my own way. I really need to get, because I am causing my own problems.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting, isn't it? Like something like depression, for example, if one was to have depression, we have a certain array of negative feelings arising, and we don't know how, I'm just sort of thinking aloud here, we don't know how to control them or quell them. And at some level, we believe that those negative feelings are essentially us, don't we? And that's why we're depressed. So we've become our own objectification. We've then married that objectification with our actual nature, apparently. Haven't really, but we think we have. And we can't separate them. And therefore, when I am depressed, it's because I am, for example, a failure. Like this time I'm not the best. I'm the worst now. I'm really the worst. I'm sorry to tell you, you've always been superior to me. I am a complete failure. Everything I do is disastrous. Don't even bother to talk to me. I'm a waste. Shouldn't even bother to feed me. This kind of thinking is just thinking about who I am in a way that is totally distorted. And we're making a categorical mistake here of accepting that the ideation of how we are is an actual description of what's here. And so this wisdom topic is beginning to prize that assumption open in layers. We peel it off in layers. And this is, the example is given in the scriptures of the plaintain tree, when it's like a giant grass. I think the banana tree is an example of a plaintain tree in the scriptures. When we peel the bark off a banana, there's no center. There's nothing there. It's selfless. It doesn't have a pith. It doesn't have a core. So innate sort of inherent toxicity, if you like, whether it's internalized or projected, has no core. It has no real foundation. And we can't see that unless we start to explore the way in which it's manifesting by using a wisdom analysis, a reasoning analysis. And I've just given an example. If I was really the worst, etc., etc. Of course, I'm not really the worst. No, no one is really the worst. So anyway, we won't work at this level of intensity in every class, but I wanted to take the opportunity of attempting to convey the importance and the vitality of this topic. And we do have really, really wonderful materials available to us, such as Searching for the Self, for example, which is a co-collaboration of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron, published in the Wisdom series. And this is an extraordinarily lucid account of this topic that is accessible, because His Holiness has been preparing these books deliberately in a way that will communicate to an English-speaking Western audience who's not necessarily anchored or deeply immersed in monastic